to Somalia, where a fresh pirate attack is sounding the alarm for global trade and business. A gasoline-carrying tanker travelling from India to South Africa has been stopped by pirates off the Somalian coast.
Safety concerns for shipping lanes off the coast of Somalia have resurfaced after pirates boarded a Malta-flagged products tanker on Thursday. Reuters reports that the crew are believed to have taken refuge in a fortified safe room and remained in control of the vessel.
For days, the intelligence reports had trickled in with the same uneasy rhythm as the tide. Satellite passes showed increased foot traffic among the cluster of tin-roof structures on a rocky Somali inlet, long known to host one of the region's more aggressive pirate groups. Signals analysts picked up brief bursts of radio chatter in broken English and Somali dialects, the kind of clipped, nervous exchanges that tended to accompany something bigger than routine ransom negotiations. What caught analysts' attention most was the sudden appearance of two skiffs dragged higher onto the beach than usual, as though their crews expected trouble or were preparing to hide them from aerial reconnaissance. Combined with the abrupt shutdown of a usually talkative pirate financier's mobile numbers, the pattern suggested a hostage transfer or the arrival of a high-value captive. Washington wanted clarity before dawn. The Navy wanted something more: resolution. A destroyer sitting over the horizon had been monitoring the base for nearly 48 hours. From its flight deck, drones orbited at staggered altitudes, watching the compound through infrared eyes that glowed with every movement. The images revealed shapes of men milling about, some armed, some resting by barrel fires as the coastal winds whipped sand into erratic spirals. Nothing about the place looked orderly, but the pirates had grown more careful than in earlier years. Their skiffs were painted in duller colors now, less flashy than the bright blues and reds that once captured global media attention. Their operations had become more cautious, more deliberate, in part because they knew Western forces monitored them more thoroughly than ever. Aboard the destroyer, the SEAL platoon had spent the previous afternoon rehearsing insertion options. They moved in silence as they checked gear, ran dry drills, and reviewed the compound layout on screens. The officers spoke quietly with the intelligence team, cross-checking every potential entry point, every wall height, every doorway that might be reinforced or booby-trapped. The senior chief floated between the men like an unseen current, offering only a few short words when necessary, sometimes just a nod or a hand placed on someone's shoulder. These were seasoned operators who had done missions like this before, though no two were ever the same. What made this one pressing was the rumor, still unconfirmed, that a European researcher kidnapped weeks earlier might have been moved to this location. She had disappeared while conducting coastal ecological surveys, and although pirates rarely targeted scientists intentionally, they also rarely released high-value hostages without a payoff. If she was there, every hour mattered. The team expected to launch around 0200, when human fatigue deepened and guard rotations grew lazier. In the small hours, pirates were known to huddle around radios or fires, their discipline slipping with the darkness. Night vision and thermal optics favored the operators. Weather conditions were nearly ideal: moderate winds, a thin marine layer reducing visibility from land, but not thick enough to disrupt the team's goggles. The moon was a waning crescent, leaving the shoreline mostly in shadow. If conditions held, the approach would be swift. At 0150, the platoon loaded into two rigid-hulled inflatable boats lowered quietly by crane. The coxswains kept the engines at low throttle until they cleared the destroyer's acoustic shadow. 10 minutes later, the boats skimmed across the surface, riding over long swells that seemed to absorb every sound. The SEALs kept low, packs pressed against their backs, rifles angled downward so they wouldn't catch the wind or reflect stray light. There was a hum in the air, not quite noise, more a collective tension forged by rehearsed muscle memory and the shared understanding that real lives, not just their own, depended on the next hour's precision. As they neared the inlet, the boats throttled down further, reducing speed to a crawl. The team observed the shoreline through goggles, two armed men by the main hut, silhouettes visible against the faint glow of a fire. Another figure paced near a skiff, checking ropes. Beyond that, darkness. The compound itself sat a few hundred meters inland, accessible by a narrow path that curved between rock outcrops. The plan called for a beach landing, a silent ascent along the path, and then a rapid breach if the captive was located. If not, they were to gather whatever intelligence they could and withdraw before sunrise. The first feet touched sand at 0224. A faint hiss of surf masked the sound of boots sinking into wet grains. The operators moved in pairs, each step deliberate, rifles trained outward. The senior chief signaled the forward element to freeze as a pirate wandered closer to the beach than expected. The man paused, looked toward the water, then spat into the sand and turned away. The team resumed its advance. Just beyond the bend where the path widened, the point man raised a fist. One of the infrared drones overhead had spotted 3 heat signatures approaching from the compound, possibly a shift change. Timing mattered now. If the incoming men reached the beach and noticed disturbed sand or footprints, the element of surprise would evaporate. The team leader made a decision: accelerate. The operators surged forward with controlled speed, gaining altitude on the narrow path. The incoming pirates never saw them. The SEALs bypassed them silently by slipping into the shadows along the rocks, letting the men shuffle past while engaged in an argument about fuel shortages. Once clear, the team reformed and approached the outer fence of the compound, a patchwork structure of corrugated metal, vehicle parts, and battered wood that offered no real security against trained forces, but plenty against unarmed villagers. Inside, voices drifted from different huts. Some men were awake, others asleep. Livestock wandered freely, bleating occasionally. A generator rattled somewhere to the east. The team split into 2 elements. One moved toward the large central hut believed to house high-value captives. The other circled toward a storage building suspected of containing weapons and communication gear. The central hut's door was locked from the outside, a good sign. Through thermal scopes, the operators saw 2 warmer shapes inside, one upright near the doorway and one reclining. The upright one carried a rifle. The reclining one appeared stationary. The team leader signaled 2 operators forward. They placed a small charge on the doorframe, not enough to create a Hollywood explosion, just a controlled force to break the latch. When it blew, the team flooded inside in a practiced, almost fluid movement. The guard barely had time to stand. The SEALs restrained him swiftly. The reclining figure turned out to be a hostage, a young man, not the researcher, but clearly malnourished and bound. He blinked at the operators with a mixture of fear and disbelief. 2 men began cutting him free while another radioed the find. They asked about the missing scientist, but the hostage shook his head, too weak to speak clearly. That was when a burst of distant shouting rose from outside. The second element had run into a complication. While searching the storage building, one of the pirates had opened the door unexpectedly, catching sight of the operators inside. He tried to flee, but was subdued instantly. Still, his shout drew others. Men stumbled out of nearby shacks, some grabbing rifles, others shouting warnings. The SEALs tightened security around the central hut. A few rounds cracked through the night, warning shots from panicked pirates firing blindly. None hit the operators, but the noise compromised the mission's stealth component. The team leader made the call to extract immediately. They had 1 confirmed hostage alive and intelligence materials from the storage building, including radios, ledgers, and what looked like a set of GPS devices used to track ransom deliveries. Although they hadn't located the missing researcher, lingering any longer increased the risk of casualties and potential escalation. They moved as a single unit now, escorting the freed hostage. The path back down to the beach was steeper than it felt on the way up, the loose sand shifting beneath their boots. The senior chief maintained rear security, listening for any coordinated pursuit. But the pirates, disorganized and half awake, struggled to assemble anything resembling a structured response. A few followed at a distance, firing occasionally without aim. Most stayed behind, shouting at one another or attempting to secure their vehicles. When the team reached the beach, the boats were already idling in the shallows. The coxswains kept the engines quiet but ready. Operators pushed off, lifting the rescued man aboard, and climbed in behind him. Within seconds, they accelerated into deeper water. Tracer rounds arced overhead from the shoreline, dying out long before they reached the boats. By the time the destroyer's silhouette rose on the horizon, The first hints of dawn were touching the farthest edge of the sky. The hostage was receiving medical attention from the ship's corpsman, sipping water slowly while wrapped in a thermal blanket. He explained in halting sentences that several captives had been moved inland days earlier, including the woman in question. The pirates had argued over her value and feared a raid on the coastal compound, so they transferred her to a safer location, though he didn't know where. His information, though incomplete, gave analysts a lead. Her value and feared a raid on the coastal compound, so they transferred her to a safer location, though he didn't know where. His information, though incomplete, gave analysts a lead.